Hi, this is Malcolm Nance, and you're listening to Black Man Spy. This is a very special episode for our first episode. And that's because we're going to introduce you to the people of Ukraine. We're going to introduce you to the people of Ukraine before there was a war. And as we all know, Russia has invaded. And now we're going to introduce you to the people who have been impacted by that war. As a matter of fact, you're going to see individuals within this program that have had their lives turned completely upside down. Andre, one of the people who runs a foreign language company, is now a soldier in the Territorial Guard. The medic who gets introduced at Veterano Pizza is now fighting Russians outside of Kyiv. The staff of Ballistica, who interview while we were buying body armor, have all abandoned their jobs, had to leave their homes, and the owner of the company is most likely fighting in the Territorial Guard as well. And when we go to Donetsk, you'll meet General Pavlyuk, the commander of the Joint Task Force who had been fighting the Russians on the Donetsk-Luhansk border area. He has been appointed the commander who is in charge of the defense of the city of Kyiv and has been promoted to Major General. And Terrell Starr, my good friend, is running around the city of Kyiv wearing my body armor, helping people out as he reports, evacuating a woman with cancer, moving a family of 6 to the Hungarian border, and meeting his friends in the Carpathian Mountains, but then again returning straight back to Kyiv. He is a fearless journalist. All of these people who we are introduced to, you're going to see them in peacetime. And now, that is why we're going to give you a completely different view of Ukraine and Kyiv before the Russians invade. This is Black Man Spy. In this episode, which we call Mission Ukraine, I'm here in Kyiv, Ukraine, and we are about to dissect the crisis which is gripping Eastern Europe between Russia on one hand and the nation of Ukraine on the other hand. But what is it? What happened? Why are we here? Why are the U.S. sending forces into Poland, Romania, Hungary to align themselves with NATO against Vladimir Putin's Russia? Well, we are standing at the heart of the problem as far as Russia sees it. We are here in Maidan Square, which is the heart of the Ukrainian revolution of 2013 and 2014, which overthrew a corrupt pro-Moscow government and brought in Western democracy to Ukraine. And that's precisely the problem. Vladimir Putin hates the very idea that this country became Western aligned, broke their links to Russia, and threw out the pro-Moscow government completely. Now here we are 8 years later. The Russians intend to either invade this country and topple this government completely, or they're making an amazing show of force with over 130,000 soldiers aligned around almost every part of this country's border in an effort to get the United States and NATO to ensure that this country, Ukraine, does not join NATO. And that's all it comes down to. Vladimir Putin making a power play, which he's either going to have to back up by invading this country and essentially trying to take this city that's the size of Chicago with 3 million people that fought right where we're standing, tooth and nail against their own corrupt government, and created a democracy. We are on Institutskaya Street. This street, which you can see, is lined with the pictures of those who were killed in the Maidan Square massacres that occurred here. This is where one of the most notorious acts took place, about a block up in front of us. This is where, when the peaceful protesters tried to walk up to the House of Representatives in Mariinsky Park, they were beaten, attacked, and several of them murdered. When the other protesters from Maidan came up this street, they were met literally with sniper and gunfire, and over 100 people were massacred. Their pictures adorn this wall over here, like Alexander Kalinsky, right? Handyman from the village of Chernitsky village, 25 years old. Anatoly Kornev, village mayor, 53 years old. There's a journalist who was 73. There were 3 women who were killed here by sniper fire from the police. And they also used a paramilitary force called the Titutski, which were essentially prisoners who were let out armed and allowed to do anything they wanted to the protesters that the police couldn't do. This is the heart of the resistance of Maidan, and this is where all of the martyrs of Maidan are memorialized. Here we have the memorial to Sergei Nihoyan. He was actually one of the first people killed in the protests here in Maidan Square. And he became such an icon that they actually stenciled, they had a stencil of the photograph of his face that the protesters put on their riot shields and their wood shields in order to protect themselves against the police. And he has become an iconic figure in the resistance here in Maidan. There are murals of him throughout the city, one right next to St. Michael's Square, and he has, again, become the face of the resistance. Now the question is, if this goes on to a war with Russia, who will be the next face of resistance? This morning, I'm in the square of St. Michael's Monastery. During the uprising at Maidan and the Orange Revolution, this became the central hub for resistance, the hospital where all the wounded were taken, and for coordination after the first protests in Maidan were pushed out by the Berkut, by the secret police. And this monastery over here, again, you'll see on the left has a wall of the martyrs who were killed during the Maidan uprising, but on the right, there's a wall of almost 14,000 people who were killed during the war in Donbass when Russia armed the separatists, attacked the Ukrainian army, and seized Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. This is the heart of Ukraine's resistance to Russia. And if the Russians carry out any further operations, it'll become the heart again. Over the last week, many Americans had the impression that Kyiv was an East European backwater, a country more akin to the old Soviet Russia. And as you look around, this is a really modern, industrial Western country with a very, very high quality of middle class and all the trappings of Paris. It's a city the size of Chicago, and it is just as sophisticated and advanced as any other Western country. And there's a lot of Teslas and Mercedes-Benz to prove it.
Не йду від тебе, ні до тебе.
We took the opportunity to visit the warehouse and offices and manufacturing center of a Ukrainian body armor company called Ballistica. We not only needed to acquire new body armor, but we wanted to see how a Ukrainian company does their activities in a small workshop. We toured the machines, the milling areas, the places where they cut the plastic for the body armors and the body armor material itself. Then we had an interview with the owner, Sasha, who was also a combat veteran of Donetsk and Luhansk. We did the analysis of the forces in Belarus who would come down from like Chernobyl, Yeltsin, Chernihiv, where you have an army. What we say is they can come to Kiev, they cannot take Kiev.
It's not real. They must destroy it totally the city to take it.
And it'll become. I was telling Andrei, it will become the biggest Molotov cocktail party in the world.
Yes, I think so. And we have experience.
Yes, and you have experience of that. Everyone who's in Maidan, right?
Yes. Буде багато крові. Ми вмиємось крові, вони вмиються крові, але перемоги в них не буде.
There will be a lot of blood, like from the both sides, but in this blood, they cannot see the.
They will wash the face by blood, and we will wash, but they don't take anything that they want to take.
Right. We went on a trip with the Ukrainian General Forces staff and the Minister of Information from Kyiv to the city Adovitsa, which is in the Donetsk area in Donbass. We flew in a relatively comfortable Ukrainian Air Force AN-26 transport. However, once we got to the city of Dnipro, the aircraft had to drop down from a regular flying altitude to about 150 to 200 feet above the treetops, and that was to avoid Russian surface-to-air missiles, which time to time shoot the aircraft down. When we landed there, we went into a completely different space. It was icy, cold, white with snow, and we would end up about 210 feet from the Russian army. When we landed in the city of Kramatorsk, we were taken to a forward operating base, and that's where we met the commander of the Joint Task Forces in Donbass, Lieutenant General Pavlyuk, the badass of southern Ukraine. Before we could go out to the battlefront, we had to put on Ukrainian army armor. We had our own armor, but they insisted we use theirs. It was easy for me because I had a lot of experience, but watching many of the journalists, some of whom refused to wear Ukrainian army armor because it was camouflage, it was quite an experience watching them interact with soldiers. With me, but the soldiers, we had a great time, and I got to know some of them very well. Like in every battlefield, there's always a war dog. As we moved to a forward position, many of the journalists were looking forward to trying to see how far away the Russians were. The distance was 70 meters, and the Russians let us know it. While General Pavlyuk wasn't particularly concerned about the heavy machine gun fire coming our way, his chief of staff seemed particularly disturbed. As we came off the battlefield, some of the journalists were given an opportunity to interview General Pavlyuk. Desperate to hear more about Russia and not about the Russians 210 feet away from him, they asked some particularly stupid questions. Apparently, the Russians and the Donetsk separatists know when there's a news media gaggle around, so they tend to send a little fire our way just to make sure that some of the journalists get the full effect. However, they were real bullets aimed in a real way at the Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefront, so it was no joke. I pondered some of the questions that the journalists had been asking them, and I got very confused as to why they would speak to a man that had such authority in such a way as if he hadn't already been doing this job for some time. And those are the kind of questions that I asked. And the Ukrainian army noticed it and decided to interview me.
You had the fire,
Yeah.
you saw the destroyed building.
Yeah.
Okay, what is your feeling and what is your meaning about this situation?
Well, you know, I'm a combat veteran. I was in the military for 20 years and U.S. intelligence for 10 more years, and I'm a national security expert on in the news media now. I understand that Donetsk and Luhansk, the entire Donbass region and Crimea, you've been at war for 8 years. Now the war that's being threatened is just in all of the other parts of Ukraine. One thing that I tell the American public is this: you fight, and you will fight. I mean, maybe they can get to Kyiv in 72 hours, but it'll take 3 years to take the city. You'll be throwing stones out the window and flower pots down. We have a joke. It will be the largest Molotov cocktail party in the world. So it's not going to happen. You have your own war here. Russia has been fighting you for 8 years. What you need is more equipment and support. That's what I think. So,
Thank you.
how many javelins do you really want?
A lot.
I can help with that.
Okay, but
Don't worry.
you should
What do you think about Ukrainian soldiers from private to colonel?
Oh yeah, they're great. Because I was in your job. I did this job. When I go up there and I look at the guy, he's on the observation periscope. He goes 70 meters. Okay. I've been in close combat. First, do you have enough coffee? That's the most important question. Second, are your watches 4 hours on or 8 hours on? It's a hard job. You know, wearing armor all day, having to clear your weapons, and then indirect fire, idiots with PKMs, shooting for fun. You know, the point is, you're here fighting for your country, your people, and I know you'll fight and continue to fight. The Americans need to think about helping you more, I think.
Thank you.
so much.
You're welcome.
Well, he died in captivity. They found his cell phone, took some photos, found his daughter's number on the cell phone. It was signed like daughter, which translates like something about my little girl.
Yeah.
And they sent her
Photos.
the photos of his like mangled body, and with some text like look honey, here's what I'm doing, and his like half of his head is gone, and they made fun of it, and like they terrorized like his wife and family with those photos like in one evening, because they
So now I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the commander of the army.
Okay.
With the situation with Russia here, what's your opinion?
my opinion is that Russia is definitely involved, and they
Not just Donetsk. I'm talking about in Belarus and Kursk. There's 140,000 soldiers out there waiting for something.
They're waiting. I think that they just try to negotiate something out of the world by threatening us and the world through us. Because, well, they don't need our territory. They need to make an example of us. Just look what we can do if you don't retaliate. Like, we're allowed to do anything, and we can take anything. We are a global power. Just they don't have anything to offer except that like aggression and that kind of negotiation.
So you don't think they're going to invade?
I think they're gonna try to invade in some form or another. If you ask me, I think that they have some more than one plan of invasion and on different scales. And what I really do think that they will do, they will try to escalate the Donbass region situation. They will maybe go in
Try
again.
to take the rest of the territory.
Try to get to Mariupol,
Yes.
because they have a lot of troops in Novozovsk, and they've been trying to escalate in April when I was on deployment
Yeah.
there. They were shooting their own positions, their own troops, to blame it on us. And,
As a provocation.
yeah, we had an incident when on one night I've heard the shelling 120 mortar shells. It was shaking all around us, and when you're in there and you hear something like that, you know when they're shooting you and where the explosions go on their side.
Right.
And we never had anything above 82 millimeters there.
Right. So someone's shooting 120s on their side from their side.
They were shooting something heavy from their side to their side, and the next day, we have a captured radio talk, the communications, when some of their artillery commanders transmit the coordinates, the grid for the shelling. And then the guy who receives the grid, he says, "Well, that's our position,
grid,
that's our grid. That's our guys." And the other guy, who is the top commander, says, "Well, you should not care like hell about those guys.
Yeah.
Those are not you. They will die. We will come in. We will go in, and we will have some fun. You know."
Provocacija. So my guest is Terrell Jermaine Starr. Terrell, I'm so happy you're here, and I'm happy to be here with you because there's nothing more amazing than a real expert. And like you, I'm a field intelligence guy. Yeah. My entire career was me out there, which is why I couldn't get married in 20 years. Right? No. So I had to wait till I was out of the military. And that is what you are. And I love on-ground expertise.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into drinking?
Yeah, most definitely. So so I got into this field, Russia and Eurasian studies. I was in college, and I was at the HBCU. That's interesting. I went to a historically black school, and I grew up in Detroit.
What school was that?
Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas. I got a full scholarship. And so when I first became interested in foreign affairs, it was at this little HBCU, right? And there was a counselor running towards me saying, "Terrell, do you want to go to Senegal?" So I said, "Okay, yeah." And so I went for free. That was my freshman year. And then I went from there to Haiti.
Wow.
That was my second foreign trip. That was in my junior year. Then I went to Russia.
Well, which trip gave you the real travel bug?
Russia.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you about Russia. The reason being is that because I stayed longer.
Okay.
Right? So there are a lot of people who like to hop from one country to the next. I like to stay someplace and kind of get...
You live there.
live there.
You like to use the country.
Yeah, exactly. Get the feel the culture, exactly.
Yeah.
So I can get into it. And so hear the language and the culture and just get used to idioms when people speak, and just get used to seeing what type of smells come out at a particular type of day.
Right.
All that stuff was really important to me. And so I didn't...
My big thing is buying bread and coffee.
I always keep bread, always keep coffee. By the way, all this bread is from Ukraine, all the flour and everything. None of this stuff is imported. Another story, we'll talk about that later. But basically, my grandmother had died as soon as I graduated from high school, so I was by myself. And so the reason why I was traveling to different places was during summer breaks, I needed a place to stay.
Right.
And so when I went to Russia, I lived in an orphanage. And so that was like a Russian orphanage, a Детский dom. And I stayed in the Детский dom because...
Which one?
Okay, so I was in the St. Petersburg Oblast, and the name of the Oblast was it's Leningrad Oblast.
Okay,
right. It's Leningrad Oblast, and so the town and people cannot pronounce it. Sviestroya. Sviestroya. That was you got it. Sviestroya.
Linguist.
There you go. So basically, you know, because Russian has all these consonants in one place.
Right.
But basically, I didn't have any language whatsoever back then. But I'll tell you, one of the things that really fascinated me was this little girl came up to me, and she gave me this CD, because back in 2001, that was in the summer, you know, CDs were the thing.
Yeah.
And so it was just Rockstar Sing Theater. And so I was listening to the language and I loved it. Couldn't understand everything, but I loved the syntax and everything. But basically, man, I was like, I gotta come back after a summer. I was like, man, I gotta come back here. The white knights, all that stuff fascinated me.
Right.
And then in this orphanage, man, you had all kinds of kids coming through, Chechens,
Right.
etc. And a lot of the kids were there because of alcoholism of their parents.
Right.
You know, and so I'm like, okay, wow, this is really important. Now, as soon as I left, I was like, okay, I got to go back again, and I applied for Peace Corps. And on my Peace Corps application, I said I want to go to Russia. They sent me to Russia, but right before I was set to go, the Russia program was canceled.
Oh, right.
Right? And supposedly the criminal accused Peace Corps of hosting spies. So bam, gone. So I went to Georgia, Gruzia. And obviously I was there during the Rose Revolution when Socrates really got into power. And so, yeah, and so after that point, I'm like, I just got hooked on this Eastern European thing. And then this guy, when I was there, the ambassador said, Terrell, have you heard of this program, this graduate program called Russian East European Eurasian Studies? I was like, yeah, gotta do it. So just imagine a U.S. ambassador writing your recommendation to grad school. And so I got a full right to grad school. Like for both of my master's degrees, so I don't have any debt. But anyway, man, like that's like for me, I got in and I really learned about ethnicity, and I'm telling you, man, what really fascinated me as a black man was how you grew up in Detroit, you have this idea of what whiteness is, and then you come over to this part of the world and you walk around and it's like, okay, they don't think about whiteness the way that we do.
Right.
And so like I had a lot of intellectual curiosity, and so it just took me on from there, man, to the point where I just can't stop being here, and it culminated to me getting a Fulbright, and I'm here.
Right.
You know? That's the abridged version.
And how long have you been in Ukraine, in and out of Ukraine?
Oh, listen, since 2009. And I live here part time, so so I live here part time. I have an apartment here that a friend lets me stay at, and it just gives me the base to really be on the know, because I like to be on the know.
Well, I'm here with Andre, our good Ukrainian friend, and what we wanted to get is a perspective that most Americans are not getting. They are hearing from the news media, the White House, the Kremlin, Francois Macron. They're hearing from everybody except the Ukrainians. So what is the Ukrainian perspective, your personal perspective on this crisis?
First, we need to remember that it's not the crisis that started yesterday. Mm-hmm. We've been in this war for soon, it's going to be the 8th year into the war with Russia. This is our adamant position that it's not the crisis, it's war, Ukraine-Russia war, in a hybrid mode. Mm-hmm. A hybrid mode. So we've been in this situation, we've been receiving casualties, we've been seeing our friends being wounded, friends being killed, or have had a serious fighting combat experience out in the Eastern Front and the Southern Front. So the escalation today we've been prepared for. Psychologically, as I know that many journalists and media people, they expect to see Ukrainians panicking when the troops are massing across the border. Is not happening. It's a result of that psychological preparedness that anything can happen with us, and we're prepared for that.
My biggest observation here since I've arrived is that Westerners think they're coming to an Eastern European, former Soviet, decrepit city that has, no real wealth. And it's just amazing. You come here and you're like, okay, I can't tell if this is Frankfurt. I can't, but
certainly based on the number of BMWs and Mercedes. Or, this is a very large city. It's 3 million people, and it's huge. It is not small by any measure.
No, we are 3 officially to 5 billion people unofficially, and it's Kiev is the largest point of economy in this country. It produces more GDP than any other cities. So it's got everything that any other normal European city has got inside.
Right.
And if you walk out in the street, and you would never notice that you are, whether Central or Western Europe, it's just a normal city.
And these people think, when they think war zone, Belgrade was like this during the Serbian War. Belgrade was a very metropolitan center,
Exactly.
and it was the fighting and the government that was doing these things. That's not here. It's nowhere near here. It's how many hours to Donbass? By car, 8, 10 hours.
Yeah, 8, 10 hours. Yeah.
From this capital. A lot of people see how the Russian forces are arrayed up in the Belarus, just over the border near Homil, Rachitsa, Yeltsk, in that area just north of Chernobyl. And there was a news program by France 24 yesterday. They went right to the border crossing, and these guys were saying, the Russians can come through here, but it's not like we don't know where they are.
Our defense minister and personnel had what we call a psychological barrier. It was a point of disbelief. We couldn't believe they're actually doing it.
Right.
On one side, on the other side, psychologically, we were not prepared to kill the Russians. Because the Crimea is all populated by Russian-speaking and Russian ethnic people, and for decades we've been talking about friendship. We've been even talking about some sort of a brotherhood. That's really questionable even back then, but still there was Russian military presence in Crimea, in Sevastopol, throughout all the years of Ukrainian independence there through annexation. So there was exchange going between Ukrainian military people, personnel, Navy, Army, and Russian all the time.
Right.
They're sat at the table, their families lived next to each other, their children went to same kindergarten, same schools, and now all of a sudden I had to shoot him. So people were not prepared, and there was a part of why Crimea was given peacefully, and I'm happy, this is my personal opinion, that it happened, that it didn't go into a combat stage. Same way it will return, I believe, a few years down the road. So that was a big thing, is to all of a sudden I have to shoot someone that I sat at the table with. Now it's a different situation. After 8 years of bloody combats in the east, of all this dirty politics that's been going on from Kremlin side, and that the people from East Ukraine to West Ukraine have seen their sons and daughters being buried, given honors, and there's no psychological barrier any longer, and that helps us to keep calm and not panic. Another angle of this is that there's a lot of, in the media, Western media, spoken about Russian army capacity to offense capacity, which is enormous, I believe. But no one's talking about Ukrainian defense capabilities on the other side, which is growing by day, thanks to, with a little help of my friend, growing larger and larger day by day. And minus that psychological barrier, it gives us enormous potential for being calm, not panic.
Right. Yeah, because when you see in the news media, and this is one thing that's driven me absolutely crazy, they go, well, from the Belarus border, they can be in Kiev in 2.5 hours. Yeah, if you're in a minivan, all right, and you've gone through peacefully, you can go from the border to the outside of Kiev in 2.5 hours. But if you're talking full-scale combat, first off, people don't realize tanks, armored vehicles, they go in convoys. right? Not in battle formation. They go in convoys first and then they screen, and it's a very slow march, a deliberate march, so that if you blitz in, they may be letting you in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like they were saying, France 24 visited Chernihiv, where we're going to visit. And it's like, yeah, that's the first logical point of defense. But one of the things they don't tell you is Ukrainian army has a mechanized infantry division up there, or, you know, allocated to the northern defense of this country. And that's a lot of men. And many, many of them are combat veterans who have been bombarded in Donbass,
Exactly.
shot at in Donbass,
Exactly.
seen vehicles blow up, done first aid, and not to mention the country is full of veterans.
So why have we given this deep retrospective of Ukraine over the last month and a half, now that war has broken out and all of the predictions that I made in this episode have come true? If you think about it, all of the participants, everyone we interviewed in this episode, have all expressed their fears and their hopes, and now we're having to live them. In our next episode, we are going to take a wildly different change in how the war in Ukraine is seen, and how the episodes of Black Man Spy are going to become part of an international crisis. See you then.